Hi, this is Adam Fisher, and throughout this little video series, I'm going to show you how to actually create textures and apply them to 3D objects, specific kind of objects in 3ds Max. So let's get going. First off, let's look at a cube. So if I was to go to create standard primitives and create a box, and I'm going to create in my top view like we've learned, a box here. I'm going to go into perspective view. I'm going to go to full screen, so I'm going to go Alt W and take a look at it. I'm going to open up the Materials Editor. Now I can hit M on the keyboard, or I can go up top and click on Material Editor. Once that's activated, it should appear something like this. Now, if we want to add a texture into the Materials Editor, before you even begin, the first thing you want to do is actually right-click and you go to 6x4 sample windows. That makes it a lot easier. Rather than look at the 3, you get limited. But if I right-click on one of them and go to 6x4, I can actually have more to work from. So having the first one selected, I'm going to go down to the diffuse option, click on the little none box feature, double click on bitmap, and I'm going to track down a texture. Now I found this rock texture online, which I thought was really nice. So using Google search, I went ahead and I'm going to right click on this texture, go to save image as, I'm going to save out. I'm going to say rock texture. With that image saved onto my computer, I'm going to come back into 3ds Max. I'm going to track it down. And with it applied, I can actually take this texture now from Material Editor, click, drag, and drop it on the 3D object. Now, it doesn't show right off, but you have to make sure that Show Shaded Material and Viewport is selected. Once that's activated, it should pop right up. I go to close out the Material Editor just for right now. And just taking a look at this cube box. There's a few things we can do here with this texture. Now, I went across the box pretty well. I'm going to take this box and I actually go to the Modify window with the box selected. I can right-click on it and convert it to a mesh or a poly, whichever you prefer to choose. Mesh and poly both have different features that you can use to modify your object further with. I'm just going to go ahead and just select mesh for this lesson. Once it's converted, you notice that its property comes up, and you can see all the different submenus we can use to modify this 3D object. But most specifically, if I go to the Modify panel, which I'm already under it, I click the down arrow, I'm going to select what's called UVW Map. Once it's applied, it looks like something like this. Now, what does this mean? Well, if I open up the map property, I can see I can actually use what's called a gizmo. I'm going to activate gizmo, and gizmo is actually a controller that allows you to actually warp the texture across the object. So if I use the rotate tool, I can actually indicate how I want this texture to flow across this object. I'm going to do Control Z and just back out real quick. I can also use the scale option. So I can scale the texture larger, smaller, how I choose. But most specifically, I'm going to bounce out of the gizmo real quick and go back to UVW Map. I can actually select for one of the parameters. So I can find the name that most references what this object looks like. So that's no, and you can see there's a box option. So now I went ahead and mapped it to the box, which is basically based off of what that 3D object is. Now once that texture is applied, and if you get it how you want, and if you want to work the gizmo a little bit further, let's say I want to rotate it around the box, you probably wouldn't want to do this because you can get strange distortion in your texture. I'm going to do Control Z. But if you have to, you know that's available, however you want to warp across. One thing you want to be most careful about is edges appearing pretty dominant. You're going to get this regardless in some cases because it's 3D software. It's trying to place the texture the best it can across the object. I'm pretty satisfied with this, so I'm just going to basically go back to UVW Map property. I'm going to right-click on the object, say Convert to Mesh again, and now the texture becomes part of the object. Another thing I can do with the UVW Map modifier is I'm going to select this 3D object, be in a box. I'm going to come on down, and I'm going to go to Polygon. I'm going to click on Polygon. I'm going to actually use the UVW Map modifier now just to correct that one texture on that one side of the object. So I'm going to go back to the Modify menu, come on down, add the UVW map to the one poly, and you're going to notice that now I can select box, okay, and it can fix that one poly. Another thing that's very interesting is I can use the UV tiling. So if I increase the tiling, notice I can indicate how I want this texture to flow across that one side. I can go higher with it. I'm going to click and drag across the arrows. I can squish it in, or I can come down. I can stretch the texture across a little bit. I can also use the V, which is vertical, and stretch the other direction. When I find something I like on that one side, I'll right-click, go to Convert to Mesh, and now that side remains intact with the update. I can also use that same process if I go back to UVW map modifier. Let's say box is what I want across the whole mesh. So if I wanted to actually mess with the U, I can squish or stretch all sides and also vertically. Right click, convert to mesh. Let's create another object now. I'm going to delete this one. Alt W, bounce out. And in the top view, I'm going to create standard primitives cylinder. Left click and drag across the top view, release, then move my hand forward, increase the height of it, and left click to complete. In the perspective view, I'm going to go Alt W, let's go full screen. Let's apply the rock texture now to the cylinder object. Back in Material Editor. Or hit M on the keyboard. I'm going to click, drag, and drop this texture now onto that cylinder. And I'm going to close this out. I'm going to select this cylinder. I'm going to go to the Modify panel. Notice under Cylinder, I can also mess with how many segments I want. So as you can see, if I hit F4 to see how many segments, I can still add a number of segments. I'm going to right-click, convert to mesh. I'm going to back to the UVW map modifier. I'm going to map this based on its shape. So I'm going to go cylindrical. Perfect. I'm going to hit F4 and lock out. Now, also, I can use the gizmo if I wanted to. So if I wanted to indicate how I want it to flow across, I could do that if I wanted to. Keep in mind, it creates weird distortion if you go the wrong direction. Control Z. Now we're left with the top and the bottom, and it doesn't look right because it's not really cylindrical on the top and bottom. Well, that's okay. Bounce it back to what we learned about the cube or the box. Select UVW map. I'm going to right-click, convert to mesh. Now I'm going to go into polygon, select the top poly, and I'm going to map it individual. UVW map modifier. Select box, or you can even do planar. That works pretty well. And you can see it's updated and corrected how it should look. I can use the UVW tiling to stretch if I want to make it look a little more in proportion to the texture now flowing around the edges. Right click, convert to mesh. And now it becomes part of that object. Same with the bottom. Right click, convert to mesh, and voila. Delete this object. Let's take a look at a sphere this time. Create standard primitives, sphere. Now the UVW map modifier works for specific reasons. Those two objects it works pretty well with. Now if I was to apply this rock texture to this sphere, click, drag, and drop, and add it, notice that it gets to the very top and it's a little distorted. So it looks okay. Let's go ahead and try applying. Right click, convert to mesh. UVW map modifier. We can use the gizmo if we wanted to. How it wants to flow across the object. I want to go to spherical. And notice once again, it's still a little stretched on the top. I can use the UV. And the same applies, no matter which direction I go. It's pulling in on those ends. So this sometimes can work if that's what you want, that's fine. But in this case, it's not really working to our advantage. So I'm going to select UVW map modifier and hit delete. I'm going to go back to the material editor and apply just a random gray texture now, like the slot next to it, and get us back to the original setup and just close this out. So in this case, you actually have to do a texture on one side, and then you're going to have to mirror and recombine. So I'm going to actually go to Edible Mesh Poly, Alt W to get out, Edible Mesh Poly. I'm going to delete half this side. So I'm going to come in on the top view. I'm going to say this side, all these polys here. I can use Control to select multiple polygons, or if I select too many, I can hold down the Alt key, left click, and drag to deselect the polygons I don't want to delete or select. I'm going to hit delete, and now I have half of a sphere. This works the same if you're character modeling. We're going to go into detail about that here in a sec. Let's go back to full view. Alt W, back into full view. Let's open a material editor. Let's apply it. Now, once again, notice the ends are still squished. In this case, what we got to do is we're going to apply what's called the UVW unwrap. So with editable mesh selected, go down, drop tab, come on down and grab what's called unwrap UVW. For the unwrap UVW, I'm going to open up its property. Notice that there's a polygon selection tool. And in my top view, I'll just left click and drag and select all the polys. And in front view, notice that I have to select the ones down here at the bottom as well. And in the left view, make sure you select them. If you can't select in left view, just switch left, click on the name left to right, and then hold Control left click and drag, and you can select all of them. And now you can see that all polys are selected across that object. That's exactly what we want. Come on down inside its unwrap UVW modifier. Remember, I can go back or go back to poly, and they're still selected. I'm going to left click and drag so I can scroll down here. And you're going to find what's called Quick Peel. I'm going to left click on that. And this is going to unwrap those polys. I'm going to expand this so we can look at the Edit UVWs a little bit better and get into the menu. And it's already flattened it all out for us. Now, if I come on over to what's called Explode, I can use some of these Explode properties. Let's see what they do. Flatten by polygon angle, breaks it up into specific areas. That might work our advantage. I'm going to do Control Z undo. Flattened by smoothing group. That one stretches it out. Flattened by material ID. Let's try flattened by smoothing group. Once you get it set up how you want it, simply go up to Tools and say Render UVW Template. In here, you want to make sure that the width and height is 1024 by 1024. That's standard. And then go on down to Render UV Template. And notice that it's rendered. If I hit the Save Out, Save Image, I'm going to save it as a JPEG. I'm going to call this Circle Template. Make sure that its quality is at best. Click OK. Close this out. Restore down. And you can just close this out for the time being because it's already active and all set. All data is already recorded. And now I'm going to go into Photoshop, File, Open, and I'm going to track down that circle template. Once the circle template's open, I'm going to go to File, Place. And I'm going to place the rock texture. If I hold Shift, left click and drag the corner, I can maintain uniform scale. I'm going to hit Enter, and notice that the rock texture is on its own layer. File, Save As. I'm going to call this JPEG, Format, Circle Rock Template. Back in 3ds Max, open up your material editor, and then let's say with the swatch next to it, diffuse, bitmap, circle rock template, add it, show map and viewport, and now the texture appears like so. But it's still a little stretched along the edges. Close out your material editor, and let's repeat the same process. Go to Polygon. Let's go back down to Quick Peel. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually go over and I'm going to go to what's called Flatten Custom. I'm going to click and hold it down and then scroll on down to the little icon with the setting tool. It's going to bring up a flatten mapping. I'm going to say value of 50 just for this lesson. Click OK. And you're going to see now that it's actually taken an idea of the polygons and flattened them across the plane, which is exactly what we want. You want to work based off flattened plane and within rectangular form. Now I'm going to go to Tools, Render UVW Template, 1024 by 1024 width and height, Render UV Template, hit Save. I'm going to rename this Circle Template 2. Create it as a JPEG. Format as JPEG. Save. Quality best. Click OK. Exit out of here. I'm going to restore this down. We can exit out of there. Back in Photoshop, let's go File, Open. Find your template. Go to File, Place. Place the same rock texture. Hold Shift, left click and drag the corner to maintain uniform scale. Hit Enter. Notice it's on its own layer. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Save As, and let's call this one JPEG. Circle Rock Template. Let's call this Circle Rock Template 2. Okay, and you can name it whatever you want, guys. Back at 3ds Max, UVW Map Modifier, just deselect your object. Let's grab another swatch in the material editor, diffuse, bitmap, Circle Rock Template 2, show map and viewport, bring it on over, and now look at the update. Much, much better. You can still see some kind of seams going on here. That's normal. But in the long run, this is going to work best for your kind of texturing of these shapes. Now, how would I make it? Now, how would I bring the other side back? Select your object. Right-click, Convert to, Mesh. Go to the mirror property. Say Copy. We'll mirror it off of the X and click OK. And voila, it's all back. And it's like on the same sides. Now here's something you are going to run into. Just because you see some of the edges, it's because some of that texture is darker on one side than it is on the other. So you should always try to make sure that your outside edges, when using textures, are all kind of like the same value. That's the only reason why that's showing up in 3ds Max. Otherwise, if all your outside areas of that texture are the same value, you want to get any kind of lines. But you understand the process. All right, I'm going to go to File, Open now. I'm going to open up this character that I created. And for anybody who's been to my website, you probably recognize this character already. It's taken from one of my works. This was the 3D model and final model that it came up with, and I built from this character to build other characters. But for this texture editing lesson, I'm going to show you how you would actually texture characters, but especially the face. And this would actually apply to any part of the mesh. But I'm just going to go ahead and do the head for this lesson, just so you understand. Okay, that said, I'm going to select my head object. And let's go ahead and understand how I would actually texture a completed face or head of a character. And then once you follow this one process, you can apply it to pretty much all the rest of your character meshes. So editable mesh, let's add the unwrapped UVW. Let's go to polygon. Let's go to all the views. So Alt W to get yourself out of there. And specifically the left side, I'm going to left click and drag. Let's say I want to do these polygons. Hold Control and select more. Get the ones you need. And then I'm actually going to left click on left and go to right. So I can select the other side. Hold Control, left click and drag and select the polygons you want so they align. Let's bounce out of there. Alt W. Let's look at our front view. Looks good. And let's take a last glance at the perspective. Yep, those are all the polys you want. Inside the unwrap, left click drag so I can get down here in the menu. Let's go down to Quick Peel. Click it. You're going to bounce into the Edit UVWs. And inside here, notice that we also have Control Scale options. So I'm going to use the Rotate, left click and drag to rotate it so it faces 90 degrees, and then the Move option. So I can move it on up and get a better glance at it. Now this is the rest of the polys that are left behind. So if I left click and drag and select them, I could edit in here if I wanted to, moving them across the layout, but this would create stretching of the texture once applied. So you really shouldn't do that. You should try to ignore that at all costs. Now you would also come on in if you wanted to map other parts of the face, I'm going to close this down, and I would go ahead and say ear. Let's say this side of the ear, polygon, quick peel. And then back inside there, notice that it grabbed those polys. That's part of the ear. But for this lesson, I'm simply going to go ahead and just do the front of the face just so you understand the idea. Tools, render UVW template, 1024 by 1024 height width, render UV template. Let's save it. Now I'm going to name this JPEG, and we're going to say face template. You can name it whatever you like. Hit save. Make sure it's at best. Okay. Let's close all this down. Restore down. You can close this out. Unwrap UVW. Let's go full view just so you can see what's going on here. In Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and let's just close these down. Let's open up that face template. File open. And now I'm actually going to create a new layer. So I'm going to create a new layer above my background layer, and I'm going to use the paintbrush. I'm going to find a good flesh tone here to work with. This looks pretty good. And with the brush, using the brush settings, size, hardness 0. Make sure your hardness is 0 so you get good control feathering. The blending of colors. Say a good size. Left click and drag on layer 1. Let's call this flesh color. I'll paint so none of those white and green lines appear. Those are the polygons, remember, the front of the face. File, save as, JPEG. I'm going to save this as face final. Why not? That sounds good. Enter, enter. Back in 3ds Max. Let's open up our material editor, or hit M on the keyboard. Notice I got some other rendering of textures applied in this menu. If you ever open up a Max project and it's got some strange textures applied, go to Utilities and just reset all your material editor slots. All right, I'm going to grab the first one like we've already learned, diffuse, bitmap. I'm going to bring in the face final, show map and viewport, left click, drag, drop it on my model, and voila. There you go. Now again, we didn't do the other parts of the head, but you kind of got the idea from this little lesson what you can do. All right. So let's say I want to create darker areas to create shadowing around the eyes. Back in Photoshop, we'll create another layer. Let's call this layer dark areas. And on this layer, I'm going to go to the brush tool, left click on the color swatch, grab a darker tone. I'm going to take the flesh color layer and lower its opacity just so I can see where those eyes actually are located. And on the dark areas, I'm going to zoom in. So grab the zoom tool, left click on stage, or left click drag. Brush tool, darker area, and dark area, to lower my brush size. Just kind of paint like around the eyes. So you can create some kind of shadow contrast. Bring the flesh color back to 100% before you save it. Otherwise, it will save it with all those green and white lines. File, save as, and I'm going to override what I currently have. So I'm going to override the face final. Okay, and then back in 3ds Max, it's an instant update. Keep in mind that you can go to my LinkedIn page at linkedin.com if you would like to link up with me and have me as a resource and a reference in your list of contacts. You can send me a message at my LinkedIn, and that will reach out to my Yahoo email, hence my Gmail accounts, and I can always be there to help you. Thank you for watching, and look forward to working with you.